Now this is one of the best, strongest, and fastest Immortal Firebolt Sorcerer build in Season 4. With this build you can easily clear multiple tier 101 plus pits and destroy any Uber bosses, even Uber Lilith. With this build you will always be immune to damage, basically making you invincible. And I highly recommend you to watch this video from the beginning to the end to see how everything synergizes. So let's check this out. So first I'm going to show you clearing a tier 101 pit. I can easily clear multiple tier 101 plus pits and get tons of materials and items. This build is so strong that you can easily destroy huge groups of enemies and melt bosses. This build can handle any Uber bosses and easily beat Uber Lilith. And I'll share why this is the easiest class and build to beat Uber Lilith. Now since you'll be always using Flame Shield with this build, which makes you immune to damage, you can basically ignore all your defensive stats and just focus on offense. Now this is a very expensive build and also an endgame build, so you will have to be level 100 and will need to masterwork all your gear if you always want to have Flame Shield active. Now I do not recommend to use this build for leveling, and this build will not work if you don't have the key items and if you don't fully masterwork your gear. So I recommend to use another build like the Frozen Orb build to get the key items and get the materials to masterwork your gear. Once you have the key items and fully masterwork your gear, this build will dominate, but I'll go over everything in more details in their dedicated sections. Now in order to be fully immortal, you have to have Flame Shield active all the time. So in order to do so, you will need around 50% attack speed and at least 50% cooldown reduction. You also need to get the tempering stats, pyromancy attack speed, and Flame Shield duration for this build to work. You need to stack attack speed because you will be using a legendary aspect, the Hectic aspect, to reduce your Flame Shield's cooldown after casting 5 basic skills. But if you can get all the key items for this build and fully masterwork all your gear, you can easily clear tier 101 plus pits and destroy any Uber bosses while becoming immortal. So next for the skills. Now the basic skill I'm using is Firebolt, and this is our main damage dealing skill. This skill will deal burning damage and can pierce through burning enemies. And you want to pair this skill with the unique gloves, the Flame Weaver, in order to split the Firebolt into 3 bolts when cast through your firewall and increase its damage. And this skill can easily destroy huge groups of enemies and shred bosses. The next skill I'm using is Flame Shield, and this is a barrier skill that will make you completely immune to damage and burning surrounding enemies. And because of your other skills and stats, you can always have Flame Shield active, making you completely invincible all the time. And this is a key skill for this build to become fully immortal. The next skill I'm using is Firewall, and this will create a wall of fire that burns enemies. And if you stand in the firewall, enemies will take increased burning damage. Now this skill is used with the unique gloves, the Flame Weaver, to split the firebolt and to increase the firebolt's damage. The next skill I'm using is Frostbolt, and this skill will throw a bolt of frost that does cold damage. Now we want to only use this skill once in a while in dungeons and boss fights. We need to apply cold damage to increase our damage when using the unique ring, the Talrash's ring, and a glyph on the Paragon Board, the Elementalist glyph. Now the next skill I'm using is Fireball, and we're not actually casting this skill at all. This skill will be used just for an enchantment slot. So with the Fireball enchantment, enemies will explode when you kill them. That damages and burns surrounding enemies, making the Fireball enchantment really strong to easily destroy huge groups of enemies. And the last skill I'm using is Teleport, and this is the best and fastest movement skill in the game. Teleport will deal lightning damage needed to proc the Talrash's ring and a glyph on the Paragon Board, the Elementalist glyph. Teleport will also make you unstoppable and form crackling energy for each enemy it hits. Now we need to pick up crackling energy because of a glyph on the Paragon Board, the Charged glyph, in order to greatly increase our damage. And we'll also be using Teleport as an enchantment to replace your evade with a short teleport to quickly speed farm dungeons. Next for the enchantments. Now for the first enchantment, I'm using the Fireball enchantment, and with the Fireball enchantment, killing enemies will explode that damages and burns surrounding enemies, making the Fireball enchantment really strong to easily destroy huge groups of enemies. The next enchantment I'm using is the Teleport enchantment, and the Teleport enchantment will turn your evade into a short teleport. So evading will teleport you, dealing lightning damage and forming crackling energy. You will also use the Teleport enchantment with a legendary aspect, the aspect of Frosty Strides, which states while below 55% life, evade freezes close enemies, dealing 11,028 cold damage to them and makes them vulnerable for 3 seconds. And you want to pair the Teleport enchantment with boots that gives you attacks reduce evade's cooldown by 1.5 seconds in order to evade almost all the time. So the Teleport enchantment is really strong for speedrunning dungeons and destroying huge groups of enemies. Okay, so next for the skill tree. Now I do want to mention that I did unequip the Shaco so it's easier to view the skill tree. But the Shaco is required for this build because it gives you cooldown reduction and plus ranks to all skills. And I'll have the full skill tree layout in a D4 build planner in the description below. So starting with the basic skills, I put 5 points into Firebolt, a point into Enhanced Firebolt, and a point into Glinting Firebolt. Now this is our main damage dealing skill that deals burning damage and can pierce through burning enemies. And you want to pair this skill with the unique gloves, the Flame Weaver, in order to split the Firebolt into 3 bolts when cast through your firewall and increase its damage. Next for the core skills, I put 1 point into Fireball, a point into Enhanced Fireball, and a point into Greater Fireball. And this skill is just used for the enchantment slot. So with the Fireball enchantment, enemies will explode when you kill them. That damages and burns surrounding enemies. Next for the defensive skills, I put 5 points into Flame Shield. And this is a barrier skill that will make you completely immune to damage and burning surrounding enemies. And because of your other skills and stats, you can always have Flame Shield active, making you completely invincible all the time. And this is the key skill for this build to become fully immortal. Next, I put 4 points into Teleport, a point into Enhanced Teleport, and a point into Mystical Teleport. And this is the best and fastest movement skill in the game. Teleport will deal lightning damage needed to proc the Talrasha's Ring and a glyph on the Paragon Board, the Elementalist glyph. Teleport will also make you unstoppable and form crackling energy for each enemy it hits. Now we need to pick up crackling energy because of a glyph on the Paragon Board, the Charged glyph, in order to greatly increase our damage. And we will also be using Teleport as an enchantment to replace your evade with a short teleport to quickly speed farm dungeons. Next, I put 2 points into Elemental Attunement, and this will give you a chance to reset the cooldown of one of your defensive skills when you critically strike an enemy. And then I put 3 points into Glass Cannon, and this will greatly increase your damage, but in return you'll take more damage. Next, for the Conjuration skills, I put 3 points into Precision Magic, and this skill will greatly increase your lucky hit chance. Next, for the Mastery skills, I put 1 point into Firewall, a point into Enhanced Firewall, and a point into Mage's Firewall. And this will create a wall of fire that burns enemies. And if you stand in the firewall, enemies will take increased burning damage. Now this skill is used with the unique gloves, the Flame Weaver, to split the Firebolt and to increase the Firebolt's damage. Next, I put 3 points into Icy Veil, and this will increase the duration of your barrier skills. And next, I put 3 points into Inner Flames, and this will increase the damage of your Pyromancy skill when you are healthy. But I do want to mention with this build, most of the time when doing high tier pits, you will want to be below 55% life to activate a legendary aspect, the aspect of Frosty Stride. But when doing easier content like Hell Tides, you don't need to activate the aspect of Frosty Stride and can be full life. And next, I put 3 points into Devouring Blaze, and this will greatly increase your critical strike damage against burning enemies. Next, for the ultimate skills, I put 3 points into Permafrost, and this will increase your frost skills damage to elites. Next, I put 3 points into Horrorfrost, and this will increase your damage to chilled or frozen enemies. And then I put 3 points into Icy Touch, and this will increase the cold damage to vulnerable enemies. Next, I put 1 point into Fiery Surge and 3 points into Soulfire, and this will increase your Pyromancy skills damage. And when you stand still for 2 seconds, this skill's bonus is doubled. And then I put 3 points into Endless Pyre, and this will increase your burning damage to enemies. And last but not least, for the key passive, I put 1 point into Combustion, and this will increase your burning damage for every additional unique source of burning damage you have applied. Okay, so that's the full skill tree layout for this build to easily speed farm high tier pits and destroy any uber bosses. And in order to get the Frostbolt skill and put it on your skill bar, you have to equip the Shaco, which gives +4 ranks to all skills. And I'll have the full skill tree layout in a D4 build planner in the description below. Okay, so next for the gear. Now for the gear, you will need certain affixes and tempering stats for this build to work. Without getting a lot of attack speed and cooldown reduction with the Pyromancy attack speed tempering and the Flame Shield duration tempering, this build will not work. Having these affixes and tempering stats will allow you to have Flame Shield active all the time. And I'll have the full gear layout in a D4 build planner in the description below. So starting with the helmet, I'm using the uber unique helmet, the Shaco. And this is one of the best helmets in the game, giving you cooldown reduction. And the unique aspect will give you +4 ranks to all skills. Next for the chest piece, I have intelligence, lightning resistance, and ranks to Flame Shield. Now with this build, you don't need any defensive stats because you will have Flame Shield active all the time, making you immortal. And for the tempering stats, I have Flame Shield duration and lucky hit chance to stun enemies. And for the legendary aspect, it states, while below 55% life, evade freezes close enemies, deals 11,028 cold damage to them, and makes them vulnerable for 3 seconds. seconds. And this legendary aspect is really strong for crowd control and destroying huge groups of enemies. Next for the gloves, I'm using the unique gloves, the Flame Weaver. And these gloves will give you attack speed, damage to burning enemies, ranks to Firebolt, and ranks to Devouring Blaze. And the unique aspect states, casting Firebolt through your firewall causes it to split into 3 bolts, each dealing 70% more damage. And this unique aspect will allow your Firebolts to deal crazy damage and destroy huge groups of enemies. Next for the pants, I have Intelligence, Shadow Resistance, and ranks to Firebolt. And for the tempering stats, I have Flame Shield Duration and Lucky Hit, chance to freeze enemies. And for the legendary aspect, it states, Lucky Hit, damaging an enemy has up to a 20% chance to daze them for 2 seconds. You deal 20% increased damage to dazed enemies. And this legendary aspect is really strong because you will greatly increase your damage to dazed enemies and bosses that are staggered. Next for the boots. Now I do want to mention that the implicit stats on the boots are really important. You want to get attacks reduce evades cooldown by 1.5 seconds on the boots. This is required for this build in order to teleport all the time when you evade. And for the affixes, I have Intelligence, Movement Speed, and Armor. And for the tempering, I have Evade, Cooldown Reduction, and Lucky Hit, chance to immobilize enemies. And for the legendary aspect, it states, you have 20% increased crowd control duration. While enemies are unstoppable, you deal 40% increased damage to them. Next for the weapon, you're looking to use a one-handed wand because it has the implicit stat that increases your Lucky Hit chance. And for the affixes, I have Intelligence, Damage, and Damage over time. And for the tempering stats, I have Pyromancy attack speed and chance for Firebolt to cast twice. And for the legendary aspect, it states, damaging an enemy with a basic skill grants you 4% attack speed for 10 seconds, stacking up to 5 times. Upon reaching maximum stacks, you enter a Vampiric Blood Rage, gaining 80% basic skill damage and 15% movement speed for 10 seconds. So this legendary aspect is really good to increase your attack speed and basic skill damage. Next for the focus, I have Intelligence, Damage, and Cooldown Reduction. But instead of damage, you can get Critical Strike chance instead. And for the tempering stats, I have Pyromancy attack speed and chance for Firebolt to cast twice. And for the legendary aspect, it states, basic skills gain 30% attack speed. Next for the amulet, I have attack speed, cooldown reduction, and ranks to Glass Cannon. And for the tempering stats, I have Pyromancy attack speed and Flame Shield duration. And for the legendary aspect, it states, after casting 5 basic skills, one of your active cooldown is reduced by 3 seconds. And this legendary aspect is really important to reduce the cooldown of Flame Shield and the reason we need to stack a lot of attack speed. With this legendary aspect and having a lot of cooldown reduction, you can have Flame Shield active all the time, making you immortal. Next for the rings. Now the first ring I'm using is a unique ring, the Talrasha's ring. And this ring is really strong because it has non-physical damage, Lucky Hit chance, and cooldown reduction. And the unique aspect states, for each type of elemental damage you deal, gain 14.5 increased damage for 4 seconds, up to 58%. Dealing elemental damage refreshes all bonuses. And since we can easily apply cold, fire, and lightning damage because of our skills, this unique ring will greatly increase your damage. And for the second ring, I have Intelligence, attack speed, and Lucky Hit, up to a 30.5% chance to make enemies vulnerable for 2 seconds. Now the Lucky Hit chance to make enemies vulnerable is important when fighting bosses to constantly apply vulnerable to them. And for the tempering stats, I have Pyromancy attack speed and Lucky Hit, up to a 5% chance to restore 20.3% primary resource. Now the second tempering stat, Lucky Hit chance to restore primary resource, is not needed for this build, and you can get whatever you like. You need 2 tempering stats to be able to masterwork your gear. And for the legendary aspect, it states, when cast below 50% maximum resource, basic skills generate 3 of your primary resource once per cast. When cast or above 50% resource, basic skills deal 80% increased damage. Now with this build, majority of the time you'll be above 50% of your primary resource, so this legendary aspect will greatly increase your basic skills damage. And really quickly for the gems, on the armor pieces you're looking to use topaz gems to increase your intelligence. On the weapon and focus, you want to use topaz gems to increase your basic damage. And on the jewelry, it actually doesn't matter what gems you use because you will have Flame Shield active all the time, making you immortal. And if you check out my stats, for the attack speed, I have 57% attack speed. And checking out my cooldown reduction, I have 51.6% cooldown reduction. And with these stats and all my gear, I am able to activate Flame Shield all the time, making me immortal. And I'll have the full build layout in a D4 build planner in the description below. Okay, so next I'm going to show you setting up the legendary aspect, the aspect of Frosty Strides. Now you want to set up this legendary aspect before entering any pit runs. So in order to do so, just find some enemies and let them damage you until you're at 55% life or less. You will know when the aspect of Frosty Strides is active, because when you evade, you will see an explosion of ice around you. And if you have the habit of using your potions, you can go to the options menu and change your potions hotkey to another key that you won't press, so you don't accidentally heal yourself and deactivate the aspect of Frosty Strides. And once you set up this legendary aspect, you can easily speedrun tier 101 plus pits. Okay, so next for the Paragon Board, and this is a fully optimized Paragon Board at level 100. And with this Paragon Board, I did mainly focus on damage. Now, I'm just going to quickly go over this Paragon Board, going over the important notes and glyphs, but I'll have the full Paragon Board layout in a D4 build planner in the description below. So starting with the starter board, I'm using the Tactician glyph, and additional bonus states you deal 10% increased damage for 4 seconds after casting a defensive skill. This duration is increased by 4 seconds for each defensive skill not on your action bar. And since we will always be using Flame Shield all the time, this glyph will greatly increase your damage. The next Paragon Board I took is Frigid Fate, and the glyph I'm using is Charged. And additional bonus states, picking up Crackling Energy grants you 5% increased damage for 5 seconds, up to 15%. And we can easily pick up Crackling Energy because of our Teleport skill, which forms Crackling Energy. And I also took the legendary node Frigid Fate, which states you deal bonus damage to vulnerable enemies equal to 10% of the total amount of your bonus damage with cold, up to a maximum of 30%. And as you can see, my current bonus is at 24%. Then heading right this way, the next Paragon Board I took is Burning Instinct, and the glyph I'm using is Destruction. And additional bonus states, critical strikes increase all damage the enemies takes from you by 2% for 10 seconds, up to 12%. I also took the legendary node Burning Instinct, which states your burning damage is increased by 10% of your critical strike damage bonus, plus 1% for every 25 intelligence you have. And as you can see, my current burning damage bonus is at 122%. Then heading up this way, and the next Paragon Board I took is Enchantment Master, and the glyph I'm using is Elementalist. And additional bonus states, dealing fire, cold, or lightning damage to an enemy increases all damage you deal to them by 5% for 10 seconds, stacking once per element. And because of the skills we are using, you can easily deal fire, cold, and lightning damage to enemies and gain the maximum damage from this glyph. You also want to take this rare node Ruinous, and this rare node Elemental Balance, and this rare node Elementalist to increase your non-physical damage. Then heading left this way, the next Paragon Board I took is Searing Heat, and the glyph I'm using is Torch. And additional bonus states, you deal 2% increased damage per nearby burning enemy, up to 12%. Then heading up this way, and the next Paragon Board I took is Ceaseless Conduit, and the glyph I'm using is Exploit. And additional bonus states, dealing damage to a vulnerable enemy increases your damage by 1% for 6 seconds, up to 10%. Then heading right this way, and the last Paragon Board I took is Static Surge, and the glyph I'm using is Flame Feeder. And additional bonus states, you deal 10% increased direct damage to burning enemies. Okay, so that's pretty much a fully optimized Paragon Board at level 100 for this build. And you want to get your glyphs level at 15 or higher to be able to get the additional bonus. And like I mentioned before, I'll have the full Paragon Board layout in a D4 build planner in the description below. Okay, so next I'm going to show you how to easily destroy Uber Lilith with this build. Now, because we can always have Flame Shields active all the time, you can basically skip all of Uber Lilith's mechanics and don't need to worry about movement speed to dodge Uber Lilith's attacks. So in phase 1, you can just use Flame Shield to be immune to all damage and use Firewall and Firebolt to destroy Uber Lilith. Now in phase 2, you don't have to worry about the ground catching on fire and running in circles to dodge her fireballs. You can just stand in one spot while you have Flame Shield active all the time to become immune to damage. Just make sure you don't fall off the platforms when Uber Lilith is breaking the platforms. Now with this build, you can easily destroy Uber Lilith and skip all of Uber Lilith's mechanics. So this is the easiest class and build to use to beat Uber Lilith if you're having troubles with her mechanics. But just be aware that this is the most expensive and time-consuming build to make. Okay, so thanks for checking out one of the best, strongest, and fastest Immortal Firebolt Sorcerer build in Season 4. With this build, you should easily speed farm tier 101 plus pits and destroy any uber bosses. And with this build, you will always have Flame Shield active all the time, making you immortal. And I'll have the full build layout in a D4 build planner in the description below. Hope this helps, and more Diablo 4 videos to come, so stay tuned. And of course, Lilith.